Hello, everyone, and welcome to our course, Critical Reasoning. This is spring 2020, and I'm your teacher, Dan Toohey. I like to do videos, be including some sort of video thing every week, and it's my way of communicating with you. And these videos are very informal. They're just me recording my desktop and my voice on my little Chromebook. So it's a regular thing that I do. I wanted to just make an introductory video to let you know how the course was put together and to explain to you why I'm doing this course, Critical Reasoning, the way that I am. I've taught it many years as an adjunct here at Drexel, and I've taught it in many different ways. And I've never really been satisfied with any of the ways that I've done it and the many times that I've done it. I'm not saying the classes didn't go well, but I never really felt that I had found my way of doing it. So I'm trying something new. This is an entirely new way of teaching it for me, and maybe I'll give you some idea of why I did what I did. This is a course called Critical Reasoning. At most classes, or at most, universities, it's called Critical Thinking. Drexel's a little different in that respect. And in most courses, what they try to do, or what we try to do with students, is to give them some sort of method, to teach some sort of method. And that method, more or less, is one of informal or practical logic. Many critical thinking courses, and I've done it, will sort of be a mixture sometimes of informal and formal or deductive logic. Teaching some basic logic to students, some basic propositional logic or syllogistic logic, things like that. And I've always run into two problems with that. First of all, it's not really clear why we're doing that. And secondly, I'm not very good at that, teaching logic. It's not my thing. I mean, I can do it to some degree of competence, but I never really enjoyed it. And really, if you want to study logic, you should. It's great, but it's something that should be done in a more concentrated way in an actual deductive logic course. When it comes to informal logic, usually what that is, and it can be quite valuable, is an analysis of actual arguments, argument analysis. And that mostly has to do with finding premises and conclusions in arguments and going through a very painstaking process of outlining arguments in what's called standard form. Where basically you identify all the statements in an argument, you then identify which ones are premises and which ones are conclusions, and you come up with a kind of a sometimes very complex outline of the argument. And it can be very valuable in terms of finding out where premises and conclusions are in an argument, and then using that to actually critique the argument to decide whether it's good. Again, it can be very valuable, but it can also be extremely boring. And although the process of looking at arguments and being more rigorous about them and actually asking yourself what is the overall point of the argument and what is the supposed evidence that is offered in support of that or that conclusion, it can be a very good experience. But I don't really think that it justifies a whole course. And again, it can be extremely boring. And I'm not really sure what students really come out of it long term with in terms of getting something out of the course. I'm not saying it's a bad way to teach the course. It's just not the way I suppose, that I wanted to teach at this time. So I took an entirely different approach, and it kind of got out of hand, uh, you might say, because what I did is ask myself, what are good examples of critical reasoning? And I thought of a book that I knew. This is a very good book, I think, by Bertrand Russell. Sorry. Called Skeptical Essays. I thought it might be a place to start, reading some things from Russell. It kind of got out of hand. It did, because what happened was that I realized that Russell is an incredibly great critic. That Russell really was exactly the kind of thinker that we're trying to emulate when we are trying to do critical reasoning, when we're trying to do critical thinking, when we're trying to engage in the kind of analysis, the kind of rigorous evaluation of claims about the world, about truth claims, about politics, society, philosophy, morality, social custom, and things like that. And it seemed to me that instead of looking at method, instead of concentrating on some method where we practice this argument analysis, finding premises and conclusions, outlining arguments, that we actually just look at, read, and respond to real examples of critical reasoning, of someone who is engaging in the process of critical reasoning. I'm not saying we all have to be exactly like Bertrand Russell, but it wouldn't hurt in some respects to be exactly like Bertrand Russell. I mean, he has his flaws like every other philosopher. And I thought, to give the course some unity, we wouldn't just look at examples of critical reasoning. We would focus on one critical reasoner, Bertrand Russell, who was a wonderful writer, wonderful and a very important 20th century philosopher. And that we would read many of his essays. We would respond to them, talk about them, critique them in different ways, and write about them. So that's what we're going to do. I can't say that I have a very specific idea in mind, except that let's read somebody who was doing critical reasoning. I would say one of the best critical reasoners of all time. And let's critically reason about his critical reasoning. That's, I suppose, the course. I thought about Russell's skeptical essays as being these paradigmatic examples of critical reasoning. It occurred to me that there were many other things that Russell had written that were related, sort of in the same genre, the same vein, and we will look at them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a critical reasoner, somebody who was actually not just teach. That is, I wanted to avoid just sort of laboriously going over a method, and frankly, make something that was more fun, where somebody's actually talking about the world critically, and we're using his work both as a model, perhaps, for our own critical reasoning, but also just sort of reasoning about his reasoning. Bertrand Russell was a very important 20th century philosopher. He wrote some, really high-level stuff in logic and metaphysics and epistemology and even moral thinking. He was one of the founders of so-called analytic philosophy, which was the dominant way that we did philosophy in the 20th century in English-speaking countries, at least. But we're not going to read his really in-depth stuff about philosophical topics. I thought that was not the point. We're going to read his popular essays, and he wrote volumes and volumes of popular essays, things that are quite readable, but I think also very, very smartly written and very demanding in certain ways, but things that are more that lend themselves more to reading and are not bogged down in technicalities. So we'll be reading his popular stuff for the most part. And Russell wrote about so many different subjects, but he was a social critic. And he was an incredibly interesting man, and he lived an incredibly interesting life. And he wrote about everything. And so there's a lot there. So if you look at the Blackboard site, you'll see that I've tried to. Here are the course texts. We won't be reading all of them in total. They're just these are the readings. You just try to make it more interesting by putting up images of the covers of these books. If you click on the image, it opens just as usual on Blackboard. I've also tried to stick with actual PDFs of scans of the book, just because I think that's easier to read and it's more pleasant to read than something that's just written on a computer, it's transcribed onto in a computer word processing program. It's just like I like books, and so I've gone to some pains to try to find the original book in PDF form rather than. So these texts are all here, and we'll be reading them. And so it's kind of an open-ended thing. I can't say that this course is about developing skills. I don't think there's any specific skills that I'm trying to impart to you. What I'm giving you is an example of, I think, one of the greatest critical reasoners of all time. And we'll be looking at his work over the next 9 weeks. We'll be becoming very familiar with the thought of Bertrand Russell, at least his popular philosophy, which is great. And we will be evaluating him as a critical thinker, and perhaps, and engaging with the ideas that he had. I mean, those ideas are varied, and those ideas are of all different sorts, and different topics that he engaged in. But we'll see that there are certain recurring themes in these particular texts that I'm giving you to read. The first one is skepticism. Sorry, I'm a terrible typist. Skepticism with a C. I mean, because that's the way that that's the way we used to write the word skepticism. You'll see it with a K, SKEP these days. But let's be old-fashioned. Skepticism is a big theme, obviously, and rationalism is a big theme. And those, I would suppose, they're of course, well, not of course, but those are related ideas in Russell, and they are ones that run through much of what we will read. I will leave it to you. I won't try to define those things now, because that's part of the course, is reading it, looking at what he thinks skepticism is, what he thinks rationalism is. So I won't define them now. I mean, we'll be talking about them over the next 9 weeks. But I thought I would introduce them now as words that, or themes or concepts that will constantly be coming up and being used as a means of critiquing things. And that really is the major focus of these, or the subject matter of these essays, is really criticism, subjecting society, mostly politics, social customs, ideas, religion, etc., subjecting our culture to criticism. And I think that is really ultimately what a course like this is supposed to encourage students to do in the first place. That is, when I said that critical reasoning courses usually try to teach a kind of a method, well, the method is not something that is for its own sake. The method is to enable you to better criticize to better evaluate the kind of messages, claims that you get from all sorts of different sources in your life, from religious sources, from political sources, from consumerist, commercial sources, from all sorts of different sources. And I thought that we would sort of skip that method and go right to the actual doing of it by kind of a master critic in Bertrand Russell. And that it would be ultimately probably just as useful as, if not more useful, than just sort of concentrating on developing this method. Probably just as useful and definitely more fun, because he's talking about the world in a serious way, and we can think along with them. We can ask ourselves if we agree with him. We can ask ourselves whether his critical reasoning is actually sound, and things like that. And so I think that it would be just, well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. One of the things that we'll see that Russell is sort of his lifelong project is that he is sort of working towards a more rational society. And I think that that's probably a shared goal amongst most of us, is that most of us would like to live in a more rational society. Of course, this is, as well as being a critical thinking course, critical reasoning course, it is a philosophy course. So what does rational mean? What is rationalism? But especially, what does rational mean? And why should we want a more rational society? These are questions that Russell himself takes up in what we read. So that, we'll be looking at that. But I think that in terms of a general goal, of a general orientation, we would all like society to be better. And in being better, we often put in terms of to be more rational. And again, that's something we'll be looking at in different ways. So I hope that gives you some idea. I'm sorry if I'm being vague, but this is a rather experimental way of doing the course for me, in terms of focusing on just actual reading of texts rather than imparting some method, and definitely in focusing on this one author. He lived almost to be 100, so he wrote the whole. I think he must have written every day of his life. So there's there's so much Russell material that it's not hard to base a whole course on Bertrand Russell. But I hope I've given you some idea of why I put the course together the way I did. But that, of course, will come together in the actual doing of the course, and then you can decide whether it was well done or not. But if we look at the actual way the course is put together, we'll see that we have our course text right here. If you look at the main menu, that all the readings for the course are available here. Everything that we read is right here, and there's no need to buy anything or do anything like that or look for other places. It's all here. The course is organized by week. If you click on week 1, you'll see that you have what the reading is. So it's in the course text. That there's a discussion board, and there are study questions. There will also be videos up for each reading. It'll be up for this week later today. I just haven't quite decided how I want to go about doing the videos for this course, but I will have videos of some sort every week. So you have a discussion board requirement to do sometime during the week. The instructions are here for what you should actually do. There will be study questions for each reading, and the instructions for those are just to answer them. They're not going to be graded, but you do have to finish them by the due date, which is always Sunday. So like this coming Sunday, by midnight. Same for the discussion board. So the weekly assignments are basically just to participate in the discussion board and do the study questions. The most important thing is to spend time with the reading, which is always the most important thing in any college course, is to do the reading, the study. And again, I will have videos which are optional to watch, and they will have no assignment attached to them. But I will have videos up each week to view if you would like, So every week is the same. There'll be, specific reading. There'll be a discussion board, and there will be a set of study questions that you'll have to do. Other than that, other than the weekly assignments of actually participating in the discussion board and answering the study questions, the only other assignment is the 2 essays that will be due. In each case, the first essay will be due after week 5. The second essay will be due at the very end of the course, of the quarter. And the essay assignments are open-ended in the sense that all I'm asking you to do is to write a critical essay of about 1,000 words about something that we've read in the course. In the first one, something read in the first 4 weeks of class, and then second one in the last 5 weeks of class. I'm keeping the topic open. I don't have an assigned topic for these readings. It just has to be a critical essay in which you focus on some aspect of something that you've read in Russell that you think is worth writing about. A critical essay in which you critically examine, assess something or some set of things that Russell has said. And we'll talk more about the essays as we go along. So that's it. I hope that we get some sense of what we're doing. The only real way to find out what we're doing is to actually do the readings. You'll find that there's plenty of challenging things in here, and they're well worth reading. And you're bound to get something out of the class just by reading Bertrand Russell, and you're bound to learn something about philosophy. You're bound to be challenged in your sort of way of looking at the world in a positive way, and I have no doubt that you'll get a lot out of just reading Russell. And I think that in terms of the overall sort of subject matter of the course, or the title of the course, Critical Reasoning, I have no doubt that by looking at Russell as an example of a critical reasoner and thinking about what he's doing, critiquing what he's doing, responding to what he's doing, we will all become better critical reasoners.